I'm Harvey Hubbell, and this is Show and Tell with Harvey Hubbell, and I'm with my friend, Dr. Tracy White. How the heck are you, Dr. Tracy White?
I am blessed and having an amazing day. And it just got even better because I'm with you.
Wow, I love that. I have so much to talk to you about, and so much, I was going to say catch up on, but I just spent
Yeah,
the entire week with you at Black Literacy Matters in Omaha, Nebraska.
of
So,
all places,
of,
right?
of all places, just tell me about the experience. I was there. You don't have to tell me. Tell the people who are watching.
It was transformational for me. I didn't realize how much I needed to be in the same room with people that I absolutely adore and respect, real literacy allies. And it fed my spirit in a way I cannot begin to describe. I felt the presence of our ancestors, that great cloud of witnesses, charging us to keep moving, keep pressing on. And I walked away with new ideas that I am excited to start moving towards. It was absolutely incredible. And then, of course, you and your team were there to capture the moment, which was such a gift for generations to come. People will be able to look, I think, back at that moment, that space and time we shared as an inflection point where something transformational began. So I am so grateful that I had the privilege and the opportunity, and I'm beyond proud of Clarice Jackson for setting it all up and unleashing us, in that moment, in that space. We were a tiny but mighty force for good and for justice, because literacy is really about making wrong things right for Black children, most definitely because of the history, but for all children ultimately around the globe who deserve to be literate for life.
It was so beautiful. Just everybody being there and coming from all different parts of the United States, coming smack
Yes,
dab in the middle, and we all met and talked, and yeah, we learned a lot. Um,
did.
so what made you? I mean, when you heard about it, what 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 were you thinking about? Like, what made you go there when you
What
heard
made me
about it? Is
go
it
there? It's always about the quality of the relationships in our lives. And Clarice had spoken life into my life. And this was at an International Dyslexia Association conference when I was feeling really discouraged and questioning, am I doing the right work? Am I in the right space? And she spent time with me and just tenderly ministered to me. And that's when we became sisters. And when we became sisters, anything she asked, I'm going to do my best to do and participate in. I do feel a real commitment. My platform has been about literacy for all, especially the marginalized, but I really unapologetically I'm going to put Black children at the forefront of my work. I'm 62 years old. Tomorrow's not promised to me. And I believe if we get literacy right, Black literacy right, we're positioned to get all literacy right for every child, regardless of zip code, regardless of the suit they were sent here in. I love all children. Those who are suffering the most in terms of illiteracy are Black children. And it is not because they are less than anybody else, it's because the systems have been designed on purpose to create barriers to my people group. And so I can't go out trying to save the whole world and not focus my attention on our children, Black children specifically. And as we learn, when we're serving the most marginalized, surely there will be overflow for all, which is ultimately what I want.
well? I mean, I know, and I see the statistics. We have it in our film, the statistics. So, do you know some of the statistics right now? Because I'm gonna put them up over
Go
your.
for it. Absolutely.
What is the? Do you know what the percentage is? I mean, we're failing everybody, as Julie Washington says. We're failing everybody, but we're
Right.
failing black and brown skinned babies
Miserably.
miserably,
Miserably.
miserably, and disproportionately, black and brown skinned young men are illiterate and in our prisons,
Incarcerated. All
in,
that brilliance
in
wasted and
incarcerated.
squandered. That's right.
Well, I'm an idealist, but they're not paying taxes either. We're paying taxes for them, and Amir was saying it's free labor. These guys are making stop signs. Really, the big money's in the uniforms that you and me and all the other taxpayers, the uniforms, the shoes, the barbed wire, the electricity, the pouring of that federal penitentiary, and we just keep building these things. But
There's a reason we keep building them, Harvey, and it is the new Jim Crow. It is slave labor. And these are people who don't have the right to vote. They don't have the rights. And when you think about it, it was set up that way by design. In actuality, people who were innocent were pressed into that form of slave labor after the Civil War. So that's why it's by design. And yes, you're right. It costs 3 times as much to house an inmate. However, it's serving some people really well because they are that class of people now who are working for pennies on a dollar or for free for people who are living luxuriously. And that is immoral. That is wrong. And it costs so much less, as Frederick Douglass said, to build men who are free versus try to repair broken men and women. So it is a moral imperative that we totally reinvent and reimagine how we're supporting our marginalized communities and that we break those systems down. We tear them up from the root and we plant the things that will grow for everyone to benefit from.
yeah, I think there's an interesting thing. Obviously, there's people who focus on kids and kids before pre-K and K and first grade, and we know first grade, second grade, third grade. You've worked with adults for a long time. So, well, you know what? You know what? Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do the hero's journey. I know a little bit of your story. I love your story. Can I hear the? Can I? How did you get to be you? How did you get to where you are? You once you were born, and you have some brothers and sisters.
Yes,
And tell us the story. How did you get? Why is education important to you? This is you. This is part of you. This is you.
that's right. Yes. It started with my mother and father. My father was born in Georgia and my mother was born in Mississippi. And during that Great Migration, they both ended up in Detroit, Michigan. My dad, you remember the big polio um, challenge that our nation faced. He did among all of the siblings. There were 9 of them. He was the one who ended up with polio. And so, as a little bitty guy, he was in the hospital getting braces and surgery so one leg wouldn't outgrow the other and too much. And so my grandmother, whose husband died when my father was in utero, was a widow with these 9 children to rear in extreme poverty. And she begged the teacher to pick my father up and bring him to school because he couldn't walk to school like his siblings. And the teacher refused. So she had to make a decision. She had to figure out a way to get them up north. And so they ended up in the Midwest and moved to Detroit in groups. She sent her children up in groups and then brought my father there. My father ended up in special education services because of polio. And he couldn't rip and run in the streets and get into the kind of trouble he really would have. He came close to being in juvie, but I believe by the grace of God, he didn't. And because of special education services, he had access to libraries and really good teachers at that time who saw greatness in him. And for him, it was math. He has the mind of an engineer or had. And so he was a voracious reader and he learned and he learned and he learned. And it actually protected him being in that library. My mom, on the other hand, grew up in Mississippi at the beginning of her life. Her father came back from World War II and was self-medicating from all the trauma through alcohol, became an alcoholic and the consummate gentleman when he was sober, but when he was inebriated, he was extremely violent. And so my mother experienced tremendous trauma growing up, went to 10 different schools because the parents would break up and come together. And when she was in her early teens, they finally divorced. And so my mom didn't really have a childhood. She had this dream that she would one day have a family with a husband who didn't drink. And her dream was just to have a whole lot of children and be a stay at home mom. That was her dream. Well, when she met my dad, he didn't drink like his siblings and um and his mom. And so she was like, okay, he's mighty fine. I'm going to marry this man. And so I came along, the first of seven. And I didn't know my mom struggled with literacy because of those gaps, but she actually is on the spectrum of being dyslexic, which is what we found out when she started adult literacy classes at House Education Center at the beginning of September. Um, Absolutely is enthralled with understanding how to spell because she struggled with spelling her whole life. And now she's learning the floss rules. She's learning about coding with a breve or macron, all of the rules. And she is just, her sense of self worth at 83
Yeah,
has
I
been
was just gonna just ask you. So
skyrocketing.
at 83 years old, she finds out she's dyslexic, and you're one of the leaders in our nation on education. So mom begins to read now at
You can't
83
make it
years
up.
old, and you find out she's dyslexic.
Cannot make it up. It is amazing. And so our family tree was transformed through literacy. Two forms, really, because the other thing my mother said was she didn't want to marry a pastor. So she dumped the guy she had been dating to marry my dad. And my dad ended up becoming a preaching elder in our church, which is just terribly ironic. His passion to serve the widows and the fatherless. So I grew up with parents who were all about serving the community, lifting up the people who were marginalized. And that brought me to a place where one day this grandfather who struggled with alcoholism had visited us. And we were sitting in the backyard side by side talking. And I just adored my grandfather. And he said, "You're going to be on television one day." And I said, "Really, Grandpa?" He said, "Yeah, you are." Well, that one word spoken over me, that one phrase, led to me majoring in communication studies, undergrad, and minoring in English. But I found that I loved that world and it was enthralling, but there was something missing. And so one day I was volunteering in a community center teaching modern dance to children in that neighborhood, very dangerous neighborhood. Love those kids. And I have been asking God, what is it I'm supposed to do with my life? This is really fascinating, but I know this isn't it. And it may sound strange to people, but in my spirit, I heard, "You're an educator." Now, for me, that meant I'm a teacher. That's all I could see at that point. That was enough for me. So I had just enough time to pivot as a junior, get all of my certification out of the way, and graduate on time. And I started teaching in an inner city high school in Detroit. Well, I went from teaching to having people speak leadership over me. I moved to Texas, and that's when I went from teaching to getting my master's degree so that I could become a principal of schools. And then I thought, if I'm, am I smart enough to do the next thing and get my doctorate? So I went to, did ed leadership and got my doctorate out of the way as well. All along the way, evolving from teaching to leading in a school to leading a district as an assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction and assessment. And then a new superintendent came in who hated my guts on site, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me because I ended up working nationally for Scholastic Achievement Partners. That's when my blinders came off, and I saw that we had a national crisis from Selma City to Compton USD to DC Public Schools. I worked with superintendents all over the country. I saw the same thing. The pyramid was upside down where the critical mass of kids were performing at tier 3 and tier 2 instead of tier 1. The proficiency problem was glaring, and I finally saw it and I went, "What are we doing here?" And then the door opened for me to become president and CEO of House Education Center. And I've been here for 8.5 years. And to be able to be a catalyst for change with this amazing team where we provide supports in tier 1, and then we are nationally accredited by IDA and MSLEC to prepare dyslexia therapists for that intensive therapy or intervention that every child deserves if they don't get it the first time. And every child, regardless of the language they're loved in, the zip code they come from, deserve that opportunity to be literate for life. So that's my hero's journey.
I love that. But didn't your mom make sure you guys read over the summer? Made sure.
Oh my gosh. I like to say that before Oprah's book club, there was Bessie's book club. We had a red wheelbarrow. You might have had one of those as a kid too, Harvey. And we would go to the library and we would fill that thing to the brim, to overflowing with books. We'd wheel them back, and then we have our book chats at home, and we'd exchange books. The summer was spent playing kickball on the streets and, playing hopscotch, but a lot of reading. And I traveled all over the world in my mind. That was where I started traveling. And it was so amazing because I got a scholarship to be in the summer program undergrad at Oxford University. I was the only person of color there. And to be there where I had imagined what England and Oxford and where Shakespeare grew up and what those things look like, I had it in my imagination. And to go and have that experience, it was because my mother had this vision that if my children are literate, if they can read in the language of power, write in the language of power, and express their ideas in the language of power, they will have a place at the table. And she was right. Now, that is a relative term because the rule based AAE I also grew up with is power for me in my community. I want to intentionally use that code, use those rules, depending upon what's situational and appropriate. And my mother and father, because of that unique upbringing, I had access to both forms of currency. So I call it literacy, the currency of the 21st century, because it is a form of exchange. And with AI, even more so. We don't have it in our hands. If we can't read, speak, and share our ideas, where's our place at the table? It might be that we become if you don't have a place at the table, you might be on the menu for somebody else. That's the way I would put that and have heard it put.
Now, why do we call it the language of power? Talk to me about that.
Language is so important because words are hands. They shape things around us. If I speak over you, Harvey, you're brilliant, you're powerful, which you are, you're an influencer, you're making a difference. I'm putting seeds and they will produce fruit. Seeds, words are seeds. And when they're spoken or when they're written or when they're shared, because we are creatures who have a spirit that's influenced by language and words, it's powerful. If I use my words like Hitler did, it destroys. If I use my words like Martin Luther King did, it frees. So words are containers of power. And people who do not have access to those containers of power, their narrative and script may be written by someone else, and their lives shortened, marginalized, and dismissed. And I want to give every child access to words as containers of power, whether they are thought, spoken, written, or presented.
Bam! That's pretty darn strong. Now you know why I love talking with you, and I just hung out with you for last week, and here we are again. We're still going. Listen, what we're going to do is we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to dive into some more stuff. And then that was the hero's journey, and I loved it.